So, good morning everybody to my talk about selection-based text entry in virtual reality. So, as text-based communication is rarely studied in VR research regarding text performance, there is a need for evaluating it also for user preference, for example, user experience, workload or motion sickness, and a very major characteristic of VR, which is immersion. So, we will provide some empirical analysis for selection-based text entry in virtual reality. So first of all, Walker et al. Showed that typing on a virtual keyboard providing live feedback has a crucial impact on users' typing performance while wearing an HMD. And here is a short overview how you can enter text in VR or also non-VR. Obviously, if we take a look at typing on a physical keyboard, which is a very recent work on Logitech, maybe someone knows that, is maybe the best way to enter text. But the major problem of entering text on physical keyboards in VR is that you mainly need to sit. And the common case for VR is not sitting, it is more standing, like for example this HTC Vive setup, right? And using a physical keyboard in standing situations is maybe not the best way. Another very good option for entering text in VR would be the speech. But speech input has three major drawbacks. For example, the speech recognition, especially for German, and the privacy factors and also error correction for multi-language support. So the result would be using a gamepad, for example, the Xbox controller, Vive controllers or Oculus controllers, finger input and head pointing. Here are some examples apart from this, what I said. Here you can see the Oculus Touch controller pointing at a virtual keyboard. An example from Leap, an example from Leap Motion, where you can enter text by using your finger input. Here is the Steam VR keyboard. And finally, still the most common way to enter text on game consoles, and it's also usable in VR using pad-based cursor control using gamepads. So we come to our research questions we have. So what happens if we don't have tracked handheld controllers? And what if we need a low physical demand and lower motion sickness, and they are particular importance? Again, natural or isomorphic input, like the finger input, for example, could have impact on the performance and user preference. So, first contribution is we provide a design space analysis for selection-based text entry in VR, including questions, options, and criteria. So here, our design space analysis is based on McLean's design space. As I said, it includes questions, options, and criteria. And we also based our work and our analysis on the selection-based mid-air text entry on large displays paper. And based on all these findings, we provide candidates for selection-based text entry VR, where we'll show you later. First of all, let's take a look at the questions and options we took a look at. So, first of all, we need to decide which kind of keyboard layout we should choose. There is the QWERTY layout, the Opti or Dvorak. We decided to use the QWERTY layout because we don't want to have random factors, and it's the most common way. As we also stick to consumer hardware, we also want to use consumer keyboard layouts. Again, another question is using 2D or 3D, which means which kind of keyboard representation and which kind of interaction method. The keyboard representation, for example, is a very planar representation with 3D buttons when we're using so-called pseudo-haptic feedback, which means that the buttons are moved in depth if you touch them. Another question is typing in relation to what? So that means our keyboard was fixed absolute in the scene. But it could also be stick to the view or to anything else, but we thought, and also in our prior studies, this is the best way to look at it. And also, position and size of the keyboard was studied in pilot studies, so we will not look at it in our main study. However, we come to the criteria, and this is based on the 3D UI evaluation metrics of Bowman et al., where he said that you should look at the task performance. In our case, it is the text entry performance, which means speed and accuracy, and the user preferences, which includes user experience, task workload, and motion sickness. And there is also the characteristics of virtual reality, including immersion and presence, which could be the same, and the level of interactivity. So, under those categories, and based on related work, we choose following 6 candidates for text entry and contribute an evaluation of the 6 text-based entry methods. So, again, here you can see we have these 4 devices, and using our design space analysis, we come to these 6 candidates for selection-based text entry, which are colored in the following. So first of all, here is the head pointing technique. As you can see, the user controls a cursor by using his head and triggers the input by the trigger button of the controller. The next one is the controller pointing method. It's analogous to the head pointing, but the participant uses the tracked hand. Oh, sorry. Yeah, uses the controllers for pointing instead of using the head, and triggers the input with the triggers. Another method is a more natural and isomorphic one, where the user uses the controllers inverted as pen or stylus for pushing the 3D buttons and input the text, which is quite the same like the next one, which is the freehand method. We're using the leap motion device mounted on the HMD for doing direct finger input. The fifth one is the continuous cursor method. As you can see also on the picture, on the video, the user controls the cursor but in a continuous way instead of an Amazon Fire TV or something. We're using the discrete method, which is our last method, which is a kind of a baseline for using gamepads and text input, as you can see here. So we come to our experiment. The task of our experiment was to transcribe 5 sentences with each text entry method as fast and as accurately as possible. All sentences were randomly chosen from a set of 100 memorable sentences from the N1 corpus, with 20 to 28 characters each. Here again the conditions we took a look at, where you can see the head pointing, controller pointing, the controller tapping, the freehand methods, continuous cursor, and discrete cursor. Here you can see the participants. We had 24 participants with an average age of 25.29. About 30% had visual impairment, wear glasses or contact lenses under the HMD, and no participant was colorblind. The experiences of the people, of the participants, were rated between 1 and 5, where 5 was expert. You could see that they have mainly experience on gamepad cursor and using controller for pointing or tapping. And VR experience is quite average. Here's our study design. Again, as I said, we have 24 participants, 6 input methods, and 5 sentences, and we used the within subjects design, which were also counterbalanced in this study. And we have, in the end, 720 trials. Here's the experimental setup. So we used the HTC Vive trackers and the 4x4 square meters tracking space in our lab. And here you also can see how far away the user was from the keyboard and the height of the corpus, the keyboard, and the sentence entry set. And finally, we're using a desktop PC for filling out the questionnaires and controlling the experiment. Based on the criteria I showed you before, we have the evaluation metrics. We use the words per minute metric for measuring speed, corrected error rate for getting the accuracy, and finally user preference. We use the UAQ questionnaire for the user experience, the NASA task load index for the task workload, the motion sickness assessment questionnaire for the motion sickness, and the ZUS questionnaire for estimating the motion. Here's an overview about our results. I highlighted the best method, which is the controller pointing for speed, accuracy, user experience, and frustration, as well as subject performance. All these measurements are significant differently. Unfortunately, we had no significant difference concerning the overall task load, but for the subfactors physical demand, frustration, and subject performance. So we come to our third contribution, which are some guidelines for text entry in VR based on our design space and our experiment results. So if you want to type in fast and want to concentrate on efficiency, maybe you should use a physical keyboard. But if you're standing or for mobile use, you should take a look at our flowchart, as you can see here. You can go on start and can ask some questions, like, for example, does your hands need to be free? If not, and if you have handheld controllers, and if they are even tracked, then you should use the controller pointing method. But if not, you should use the head pointing. So it could happen that your hands need to be free. It could happen that you don't have tracked handheld controllers. Then you should stick to the head pointing, according to our metrics. Finally, if you need to have a low physical demand, which is mainly caused by the head motion in the head pointing technique, you should use the continuous cursor method using the gamepad, because you could rest your arm instead of, which is not possible for using head pointing at all. Finally, asymorphic keyboard interaction, as in the controller tapping or the freehand method, performed very badly, even though it had promising user experience results, which is mainly caused by the very high novelty ratings. And it's still always the same when you're evaluating VR with novices. They find it very, very novel and very attracting, but in the end not very effective. So we come to our conclusion. So we provide a design space for selection-based text entry in VR, which includes questions, options, and criteria. Secondly, we did an empirical analysis of 6 selection-based text entry methods for VR with respect to text entry performance and user preference. And finally, we provide design guidelines for this text entry in VR based on our design space and experimental results. So a bit early, but I think we have more time to questions. So thank you all for listening. So if you have questions, don't hesitate to ask. Thanks.
Yeah, we do have a lot of time for questions. Please come to the microphone. While you're still thinking, I do have a question.
Yeah.
So, Markus Funk, University of Darmstadt. I saw now a lot of controller-based text entry methods. Mm-hmm. But when I'm thinking about the baseline, and also when I look back at your results slide, the words per minute with like a peak of, if I remember correctly, like 15, something like this, is, well, it's not as much as if I would use a keyboard, right?
No.
And so I was wondering why you didn't include like a physical keyboard.
Thanks for the question. Yes, of course, this is the first question you will have if you investigate text entry, why you don't use a keyboard. But as I said, for us, we wanted to focus, as you also can see, on very consumer hardware, very affordable. So you can buy all this hardware very cheap. So of course, there are also devices for entering text for the twiddler, for example. Maybe you know this, gesture input. And there are also many other devices for doing very fast input, and also using different keyboard layouts. Maybe this is a very related question. But again, we want to focus on a very standard setup for VR, which does not include physical keyboards in our opinion.
So if you guys don't have a question, maybe I have a quick follow-up.
No. Yes,
so maybe could you elaborate a little bit more on the use case, because I think if I just use it only for text entry, this might not be the best way of doing it in compared to a keyboard, or even breaking the experience. So maybe it's also depending on the use case, right?
Yeah, of course. Maybe I should also add this, that we concentrate on short-term phrases. So if you long texts, maybe our methods will even very different results, right? Where especially speech input in keyboards may be better. But if you want to add text, you should maybe not use VR in the end. So, yes, sorry.
Oh yeah, thank you for your presentation. I'm also looking at this topic of research, but in AR, and I'm really suffering with text entry in AR. And have you thought about voice input in your pre-trials, and have you tested that?
Yeah, of course we thought about speech input. First of all, you have always the problem of language support, where you have stick to one language to make it variable, valid and reproducible, of course. And there was also the question to focus the research. So if we would include speech, we would not have any more selection-based text entry. So you could take a look at text entry in VR, but then you should really include speech. But in our opinion, it was hard to compare speech input with selection-based input like that. This is also why we excluded gestural input.
Okay,
thank you much.
Hi, thanks for the talk. It's really good. Kai Hofmeister, Oculus Research. If you look at the difference between pointing with the controllers, which you said was the best method, right, and using bare hand tracking, can you tell me a little bit more about why the bare hand tracking didn't work? Because you would expect that to do pretty well, I think, rather than using controllers. Plus, it's also both tracking your hands, but in different ways. So.
Thank you for the question. Yes, we used the leap motion device, as I said, and we expected that the tracking issues would be the major problem, but we hacked around, and it was very, very stable. So the technical issues were not the main focus. It was extremely affected by, as you also can see here, by the physical demand, because the resting was and also the tracking range of the leap motion was a problem, and the people were using controller pointing or the controller pads tended to rest their controller on their hip instead of using it like this.
So it has to do with the amount of motion that they have to do, because I guess with the controllers you have to move very little, because it gets amplified. Yeah. And here you have, with the hands, you have to move a lot.
Yes. So physical demand was the main problem, even for the other devices. So you have a texting thumb using the pad-based methods, and the gorilla arm, for using when using the controller pointing and others. But yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. One more?
Thanks for the talk. Very nice. Also wonderful visuals at the end, like burning signals.
Of course.
Anyway, just as it also sort of maybe a guide to the next talk on social acceptability, I think there's also some papers who look at awkwardness of things. So did you have a look on maybe if even qualitatively if also I feel good in doing this in a certain game or in a certain task? Is there anything you looked at?
Thank you very much for the question. Speech was one of the most mentioned methods before we do this study where the people would not use, because they said, okay, speech maybe would be a better option, but I would not use it. Concerning this things, the people seem to forget. And we also had laboratory settings, so we did not observe any
Because I would have expected that, like, the head movement after a while, you have more than a frustration. You have sort of, I feel awkward in doing this. So that was just a question. If you had maybe thinking aloud or qualitative results that give you an idea of what the people felt.
So we had a very detailed observation analysis, qualitative analysis, but we had no comments about this.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.